You're listening to Out of the Box, a place for marketers to get inspired, get going, and break out of the box.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Jess Overton, and you're listening to Out of the Box, the marketing podcast exploring out-of-the-box approaches to marketing and growth. Today, I'm joined by Mick Rigby, CEO of the London-based marketing agency Yodel Mobile. Mick, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Jess. No, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on today.
It's great. So perhaps we can start by giving a little bit of background about you, your journey in the industry, and a little bit about Yodel Mobile as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Love to. And I think this is where you put your black and white and your sepia glasses on, because I've been doing this. I've been doing this mobile and app game since 2007. My background is strategist, big agency, creative agency, that kind of stuff. And I'd love to say it was foresight, but I had a business, and one of my clients said, "Hey, I'm launching this .wap app in Australia on a Nokia phone technology. Can you help?" And that's basically what happened. So we started working with that particular guy at the time, and then about 2 months later, the iPhone launched. So that immediately changed, I guess, the space that we were in.
Talk about good timing.
Yes. Yeah, it wasn't, because back then, yeah, we were in the mobile space. We were right at, I guess, the cutting edge of the formation, the genesis of the app marketplace. But the marketplace hadn't caught it up. So you had a lot of businesses that, were still getting into the digital space, and mobile was nothing to them. There was no infrastructure there. There was no demand. So certainly the first, I would say, 3 or 4 years of what we were doing was kind of educating people to what the opportunity was going to be in mobile, rather than necessarily helping those individuals to get into the mobile space. So yes, it was great to get in there at the early days, but it was a bit like the Wild West back then.
Yeah.
Nobody knew. Everybody was running off in lots of different directions, and nobody knew where it was going to go.
So where has it gone from there then? Tell us a little bit about Yodel Mobile and what Yodel does today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the industry as a whole has just matured incredibly. I mean, I'm sure you and most of your listeners here have some foot in the mobile and the app space, and it's an incredible, exciting place to be. From a Yodel perspective, I mean, what we've really sort of focused on over the last, I guess, 10 years is really effective through the funnel management, and from user acquisition to I guess valuable retention of those users, and keeping abreast of what's going on in the market, and being, I guess, one of the thought leaders, trying to help and define what true app growth marketing is about, because that's what we are. We are an app growth agency. We're not just about user acquisition. We're not just about user retention. And the reason we do that is, and it's my belief, that the most successful, I guess, support that you can get from a marketing growth perspective is a full funnel service from end to end, from acquisition through every aspect of the funnel, from ASO through to onboarding, through to user retention, through CRM, app review management, and so on and so forth. And really well underpinned with good insight, solid data, understanding your users, and then building on that insight to get more of those quality users that obviously add value over and above just the acquisition side of the business.
Right. Well, I think we're certainly going to touch on both sides of that coin, the top of the funnel, as you say, and then the rest of the in-app marketing, retention, all of that sort of stuff. I think most of our listeners are in the UA management space, marketing directors, that sort of thing. So I do want to focus on growth in the user acquisition world for the most part. And I guess I'd start by asking, what sorts of different marketing opportunities do you see for brands? Are there untapped opportunities out there that you're seeing that most people aren't?
Yeah, that's a really pertinent question. I think the traditional channels are effective. They're also going up in terms of price. And as we know, with the likes of Facebook, the kind of data and information you get from those channels to help you formulate your ongoing plans is being reduced. You can't use as much data anymore. So as a consequence of that, I think as an industry, we're starting to see I think, a lot more focus on two key things. One is new channels, new opportunities, and the second is I guess probably old school, going back to the importance of the messaging and the creative. So if we look at those two sort of separately, I think on a channel basis, I mean, we've seen, and it was massive last year, the introduction of podcast style
Hmm.
apps. So Clubhouse, especially, Stereo being another one of those, which is one of our clients. And these are apps that are coming to the space and kind of changing how people communicate with each other. And I think they are at the moment at the very sort of the start of what will be a very huge growth area over the next couple of years. And what that does, it allows advertisers to dip into that more audio driven advertising opportunity, perhaps, than they've had before. So certainly channels like that are cropping up. The other thing, as I touched on, is the important creative. I think more so than ever now, because of the limitations that you do see in some of the more traditional channels, that the messaging strategy has started to come to bubble up to become more important than it perhaps has for the last sort of 5-10 years. And I think introducing some of those old school qualities of understanding the messages, the medium, what you're actually saying, the nuances of that, utilizing the imagery not just as from an algorithm delivery point of view, but also from a catching the eye and compelling somebody to convert to a download, I think is going to be something that's going to become more and more important over the next year or two as well. So that's just it. I guess some new channels like the audio channels, for instance, but coming back to the value of the creative word and the imagery that's delivered through that.
That's a very interesting insight. So really combining the old with the new. I've got sort of two follow-on questions from that, I think, and one of them is, how do you actually discover new channels? What are you using? How do you keep your ear to the street?
Yeah, great. I think, well, first and foremostly, one myself and the rest of the guys over at Yodel, we understand that in order to maintain our place at the head of, I guess, this app world, this app growth world, in terms of the advice and the support we provide our clients, and beyond that. I mean, we do an awful lot of, I guess we do a lot of inf- helping to educate the marketplace as a whole. But in order to do that, we have to be live to what is happening and changing in the space. So, I myself and the rest of the team, we task each other to be able to bring to the regular catch ups we have what's going on out there, what's happening, and where the opportunities are. So that you have to keep abreast of them that way. That, I mean, and the fact that we're not doing as many conferences as we used to because we physically can't, does actually hamper that to an extent. But on the flip side of that, I mean, being in the space that we are at the agency we do get approached every day by new tech that's coming out, by new channels that are coming out, and trying to, believe me, there's an awful lot of them. So
Yeah,
actually trying to find a way through those through those opportunities of which are the ones to watch it's a fun place to be.
I'm
And that,
sure.
I mean, that's one thing that never ceases to excite me about this particular space. There's a lot of interest in it. Because there's a lot, potentially a lot of money in it for successful app businesses, there's a lot of investment in the space, and therefore there's a huge amount of innovation.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm sure you're exactly the same. But that undoubtedly, you know, excites fills me excitement, because you know that every day is going to be an interesting day because something new is going to come along.
For sure. So I think that sort of tees us up pretty well for my next question, which is, between these sort of tried and tested channels and really refining creative versus the sort of new and upcoming channels, at least from my experience working with agencies and big brands, the more quote unquote traditional brands. And we've had a couple of guests on the podcast who also talked about getting those types of companies out of their comfort zone. How do
Yeah.
you balance between tried and tested channels and the more experimental or out of the box channels?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and you know, it's a really interesting area to explore. That, I think, you know, tried and tested channels, and coming from, I guess, with a business that perhaps is an established brand rather than necessarily one of sort of the upstarts, the, you know, those hugely innovative brands that perhaps are only a year or 2 years old. There's a lot of precedent. There's a lot of established practices in the business, and that precedent and established practices are there for a reason. That reason is because they've been successful. So, what with an established business, an established brand, trying to break through those traditional ways of doing things that have reaped reward in the past is a real. You've got to bang a few heads together. You know, you've got to show how they do those new channels, the new solutions work, and the new ways of doing things work. And you know, you can get an awful lot of pushback on that. And you know, it's the old saying, isn't it? Why, if it's not broken, why try and fix it? And I think there's a lot of mentality in that. And I think, you know, brand and product managers within a lot of those kind of businesses, you know, that they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to necessarily be the person putting their head above the parapet to try something that's never been done before and for it to fail. So, you know, probably the most effective way of trying to get some of the new channels into play is to do a typical test and learn strategy, minimize the spend and risk, maximize the opportunity by working with those particular channels to show that they work, and then hopefully, you know, prove on relatively small amounts of expenditure that those channels do work. Because when that proof is there, it's very easy, or it's not very easy, but it's going to be a lot easier to then justify
Right.
the ongoing usage of those channels.
And is that true also in the other direction? Because when I was researching for this conversation, I had a look at the list of your customers, at least the list that's publicized, and you had names on there like The Economist, which I would put as sort of the older world, probably harder to convince to go to new technology. But then you also have companies like Stereo that you mentioned earlier, or Gymshark, which I'd imagine it might be difficult to convince them to go with the traditional channels. Have you seen that at play?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well done for doing the research, but you're absolutely right. You it, Again, you know, some of those channels. I mean, Gymshark's a really good example as a business that has driven their success on influencers, and they do it incredibly well. So why should they consider going down a more conventional route? And I think what tends to happen, and it's the big issue with scaling a business, is that you get to that point where you've been fishing in a particular pool for so long that you've taken all you've actually exhausted the fish in there, and it gets to that point with most business, and you see it with established, you know, app businesses like Uber that, you know, started out, you know, doing a huge amount of in-app advertising, utilizing some of the social channel advertising, and they get to the point where they have to step out of that comfort zone, and because it's exhausted or it's getting more expensive, and then going into other areas such as television or even billboards and posters, and because you're having to spread into a far greater pool of opportunity. And that, I think, is what you start to see with some of those innovative brands and businesses, is that those costs keep cropping up. The quality of users that are getting in are not necessarily as good as they were at the start. So you have to then start casting your net wider. It's the fishing analogy again, casting your net wider to try and find more of those individuals. And that's when it does start to get a little bit more expensive as well.
Right. Well, I think the fishing analogy works pretty well in the marketing world. So I think we can carry on with that. So I want to get a little bit into the practicality of things and how you really do that. What challenges do you face? What sort of pushback do you get from any of those companies when you're really fighting that fight?
Yeah, it's the justification, and I think, proving that is the solution that you need to go down tends to be, or the route you need to go down tends to be one of the hardest things to do. The key, I think, again, we touched on it briefly a few moments ago. It comes down to the individuals you're dealing with within those companies, and whether or not they are, I guess, prepared to come outside of their comfort zone. They're prepared to take a risk as well. And, it has to be a calculated risk. There's always, with those kind of businesses, there's always going to be a few mavericks in there. Now, sometimes those kind of, the mavericks, pull it off. More often than not, they tend not to. So you want to try and get the balance of that sort of, perhaps more level-headedness with an element of, strategic insight to go down those routes, rather than just doing stuff for the sake of doing it, because on the off chance it's going to succeed. So I think, coming back to that point, sort of being able to show that these channels do have an impact, what that impact will be for them as a particular business, what the other channels they're utilizing aren't bringing to the party anymore, or that they're not necessarily as cost effective as they were in the past, and then putting together a test schedule to show that we go in there, we try it, we get the learnings, we bring it back, we expand, we then go into secondary and tertiary channels along the same lines as those, but then upscale what we're doing in those other channels that work for us, increasing expenditure, and then bringing in that creative element to that as well, to test and grow where possible.
Interesting. So if we then carry that process forward into its natural extension, which I think we talked about earlier in our conversation, right? There's the top of the funnel, and that's really focusing on the user acquisition, which we've done up until this stage. So tell me how we I'm looking for a fishing analogy, but I haven't got one. How we bait a new hook to move in then to retention marketing, in-app efforts. How does that look for you guys as an agency?
Yeah, no, I mean, well done for the analogy. I'm going to try and keep that going for the rest of this chat if I can.
Good luck.
Yeah, I think. Do you know what? I think as the most successful app marketing businesses, or the businesses that have apps that are very good at their growth marketing, are the ones that really understand the symbiotic relationship of every aspect throughout that funnel. So, for instance, the fact that good and volume, a good app review and a volume of good app reviews, it's easy for me to say, has a really big impact on the algorithms within the app stores for discoverability. For instance, that good user retention will have an impact on bringing more people back into the app to utilize that app more often, in order to generate greater usage, which again has an impact, in the organic discoverability of the app. So what you have is a handful of key areas such as your App Store optimization, your initial onboarding process, your app review management, your getting people to accept push notifications, so your priming, your CRM strategy, your recommendation strategy. So they're probably the 7 or 8 key things alongside the top of the funnel, bringing in quality users, that are the key elements that you need to be focused on throughout your growth journey. And pulling those levers when you need to pull those levers, and focusing on maybe 1 or 2 key things every month is part of that process. There's a principle called marginal gains, which is a basic principle that means what you do every day, every week, every month, every year is make improvements. And those improvements could be, in the sense of marginal gains, just small improvements. But if you're doing so many of those things, they add up to, that 10, 15, 20, 30% improvement you're looking at. So if you're looking at all those key different areas there, and you're only improving your conversion rate by 1% from your app store, or your push priming, getting more people to accept push notifications by 3 or 4%, they add up. And you're getting to that 10, 15, 20% improvement on a month by month basis. And that, to me, is one of the real secrets of app success. Don't get too carried away with focusing on maybe just the quality of, a small number of the individuals that you're managing to convert through paid user acquisition. If you could spend, 80% of your time doing that, and that 20% that you're freeing up, you can make a bigger difference further down the funnel, which allows you to maybe spend a little bit more on your paid UA or bid slightly higher, but the overall impact on your long-term lifetime value will be far greater.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you're combining here a real host of skill sets, right? You talked about 8 domains in the in-app optimization, and then of course we have the top of the funnel, which is another skill set entirely. How do you, and I'm going to get sort of into operations here because I'm a bit of an operations geek, but how do you manage that as an organization if you're only focusing on 1 or 2 of these elements a month? How do you move the chess pieces in such a way that, I guess, the specialists are in the right place at the right time?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the secret to that is you have to have 2 or 3 all-seeing eyes. So I guess people that have grown through one aspect or 2 aspects of that growth skill set, whether that be paid user acquisition or strategic insight or data or even CRM, that have that ability to see beyond just the lane that they're coming back to the fishing analogy, the lane they're swimming in or the pond they're fishing in. So they can go beyond that. And I think every organization has a few of those kind of people. I think, as a business owner here, it's being able to spot those individuals and encourage them to think outside of that space. And they therefore sit within a position within the client management structure that allows them to look at those different areas. And then underneath that, you do need the specialists, and you need to have the very best app store optimization people, that the data scientists that are constantly looking at the data and challenging it and finding the insights. So they need to know that what they do is essential to the success of the business, but also be aware that there are other areas that will have a positive impact on what they are doing. So that's the way we structure. And I think a lot of the successful client-based businesses that have that growth function internally are the ones that have that same kind of structure.
Very cool. I'm always interested in understanding how business owners run their businesses. Certainly, the agency model is something that is very customizable and quite different across organizations. And I think that Yodel is an organization that's also very interesting in that you guys do specialize in this world where most agencies, certainly that I come across, aren't necessarily specializing in app marketing, both as you say in the user acquisition, but also then into the life cycle and how you really develop those down funnel metrics.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I mean, being quite frank, it's been tough. It's been tough over the years because it doesn't allow you as a business to grow, perhaps as fast and as quickly as very sort of. If you're doing one thing, you can bring the talent in. You can grow far quicker. I mean, one of the things that we have done as a business is to grow that talent ourselves, and that takes time. It takes time to bring somebody through from being a smart grad to 3-4 years down the line to be a growth manager. But on the flip side of that, it means that we as a business have, as you've so rightly sort of highlighted there, certain skill sets and experience that very few other businesses perhaps have. I think we approach the app growth space probably quite different to the majority, not everyone, but the majority of businesses out there. And certainly it works for an awful lot of our clients anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly I can certainly confirm that. I think you guys do have a relatively different perspective than most.
Great, thank you,
Mick. This has been an enlightening conversation. I've very much enjoyed speaking to you. I have one last question for you. We've been talking so much about apps today. I'd love to know what app you are impossible to pry away from.
Oh man, well, I mean, obviously, I could name check all our clients, but that would be unfair. So I'm going to go for two apps that we don't work with. One is City Mapper, and I don't know if you've experienced it, but City Mapper, it's one of those apps, and I mean, it's been very different for 18 months, considering none of us have travelled really. But to me, that was whatever city you went to, wherever you were in the world. Most of the time, City Mapper would be able to guide you through that city, and it's a way of getting from A to B anywhere that you are in that city by any means possible in the most effective way, whether that's walking, cycling, on a bus, and that kind of I guess the kind of certainty that you get through that takes away all that anxiety. And for me, as a very regular traveler, it didn't matter where I was. I always knew I could A, get to where I needed to be, and B, get back to my hotel safely. And I just love it. So that's the first one. The second one, I'd say Headspace. And from one app that I haven't used for 18 months, but hopefully I will be using again very soon, to an app that I think has been a constant companion to me for the last 18 months as the world has been going through that COVID nightmare, to help me relax and focus and get my head into what's important. And I've loved it. As I say, it's been my constant companion every day, and I couldn't have done without it over those last 18 months.
Very cool. Well, I'll certainly be giving those. I'll be checking them out, and hopefully we'll be traveling again in the not too distant future, and City Mapper will be relevant.
Fantastic. Well, when you come to London, use it.
I will do. Mick, thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure our guests will love this episode. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks very much. I've really enjoyed it.